kind of have a bad knee, so I'm going to sit down unless I get animated, which might happen. How you guys doing? Okay. This is some new material, so I don't know how the fuck this is going to go. We'll see. Yeah, okay, we'll try this. Thing, maybe not. Clicker. Where do I point the clicker? Hey, whoa, okay. Comic Sans! Let's hear it, ladies and gentlemen, Comic Sans! Yeah. All right. Which one of those characters is a puppet? Hope there's some Kermit fans in the house. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I don't know, this thing called 500 Startup, sometimes a floor wax, sometimes a dessert topping. We occasionally invest in companies. Yeah, this is going to be weird. So I was putting these slides together. Around 2 in the morning last night, I finally realized I should start working on my slide deck. And I finished this at about 5 in the morning, and I was kind of a little loopy, so not really sure of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we put together 500, somewhat from a company perspective, somewhat from a branding and fun perspective. And then David was talking a little sappily about all this, people have my back bullshit, and yeah, it's awesome, man. Whatever. All right. So I was a geek and a developer and eventually an entrepreneur, kind of a shitty one. And then I did some marketing at PayPal and a few other places. And then I started doing angel investing, and I got lucky, and a few of those things made money. And now we do this fund. This is the bragging slides. And we have a lot of companies, probably close to 700, maybe not quite yet, but pretty soon. About 200 of those are sort of outside the US, across about 40 countries. We have people in the places in red, so about 5 other places than the US. And it's really fun. And we have a very large number of people, about 30 people on the team, maybe about 200 mentors, and probably over 1,000 founders at this point. Some of which have real jobs, some of which have died and moved on. Sorry, the companies have died, the people haven't. Actually, it's not funny, a few of the people actually have died. Cats and hats. Why am I bringing this up? So one is I'm infantile. A lot of what I wanted to build with 500 was something that I enjoyed selfishly, and a lot of that was things that were fun and important to me. A sense of family and a sense of fun were really big parts of that. Obviously, we need to try and make money. That's part of our gig. But there's a lot of folks in the venture capital community on Sand Hill Road and other places who are really boring and tend to have like a stick up their ass. And I just didn't want to be that. So these are like things that I find that are really fun and important to me and have been for many years. Do you folks recognize most of these? The Adventure Time is more recent, actually. How many people are Jake and Finn Adventure Time fans? Do you watch that shit? Yeah, so for those of you who haven't checked that out, it's like super awesome. I watch that with my kids, and I think I like it more than they do. And there's other stuff I left out of here, but Totoro is also really awesome, and Calvin and Hobbes and all this shit. And the reason I brought this up is like I think a lot of these characters travel all over the world, particularly Sesame Street, Dr. Seuss, and Bugs Bunny, which have probably been around, at least 30 years, maybe 40 or 50 in a few cases. And pretty much everywhere, people recognize that shit. I don't know if it's like universally across the globe, but a lot of people have seen Sesame Street. So, they're fun and special and important characters to me and to many people since we've been children. Since I was probably 3, I can remember watching Sesame Street. And And they really mean a lot to people. They're very special, they're very personal. And so when you kind of own those memes, if you do it carefully and don't, screw with them, other people tend to engage with you quickly. They understand that they share those things that are fun and important. So I think, one of the most important things about building community is having a common language and set of values, and a lot of those aren't always, I said youth and innocence there, and they're not always innocent, but they are fun, and they are things that give you a sense of pleasure and wonder about the world, and sometimes they're lustful, sometimes they are full of love, sometimes they're kids making fun of each other and pushing each other over a fucking cliff, so it's always innocent. But playfulness, I guess, maybe is what I would kind of be getting at there. So a lot of what was important to me in the brand that I wanted to build was based around those things. And for those of you who follow me on Twitter, I've lifted the Cat in the Hat graphic from the estate of Theodore Geisel. Hopefully they don't find out and sue me. So as I grew up, although I didn't really grow up, I got older. I spent a lot of time in the geeky world. I was a programmer and engineer when I was first getting started, actually even when I was a teenager, but later after I barely got through college. And there's, a whole community there that's somewhat a little socially challenged and a little bit twisted. But I spent a lot of time in that community. Some of it is for real, some of it is of our own sort of making. And nerd communities tend to share an extreme sense of insecurity. And weirdly, that is a strength. Probably a shared sense of vulnerability that I think everybody's like, oh, you're fucked up just like me. And so it's like, okay, we're same. And then maybe there's a little bit of like, oh, but I'm a little less fucked up than you, or I'm a little bit smarter than you, or whatever. And sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's not okay. I mean, it can be painfully brutish and sexist and inappropriate at times, but it's probably starting around 1990, I think, was when I felt like a lot of the things that I had been disempowered around for being nerdy or smart all of a sudden started giving back power. And as I'm really kind of dating myself, but the cover of Wired magazine, probably around 1989 or 1990, was sort of like something that was like, wow, okay, that's like, people aren't poking fun at me for being a nerd. They're actually sort of like thinking that's kind of cool. And so there's a lot of other science fiction mythologies and nerd mythologies that played into that. But it was a very, very powerful feeling in connection with other people that started sort of out of oppression. Now, I'm not suggesting that nerds are nearly as oppressed as other cultures and societies, but that feeling of insecurity and oppression is a powerful bonding kind of mechanism. And so, like, the different sort of images that I presented here, Revenge of the Nerds, how many people have seen Revenge of the Nerds? Celebration of nerdiness. I spent a lot of time in the O'Reilly community and family, and I would say they are very nerdy and fun. The Odesk, I don't know if you guys can even read that logo in the upper right-hand corner is, I did some consulting for Odesk back around 2006 or 7, I think. And they already had a product, they already had customers, and they kind of hired me to help them get some marketing and PR. And one of the things I worked on was this kind of campaign around, well, what is Odesk actually all about, and what does that represent? And I was like, well, it's kind of like making geeks rich and famous. Sometimes geeks from all over the world. And we kind of use this Linux penguin with some shades and some bling to represent that. Now, most people don't call that work. Like spending a couple weeks coming up with some logo designs around penguins and celebrating geekiness, but that was actually what I got paid for. Before that, I had been at PayPal for a few years doing marketing evangelism. I changed my title to sort of geek marketing. And a lot of what I was doing was kind of exploring education and community around, again, those insecure, nerdy communities and figuring out like what makes them tick. And again, I think it was very much this sense of shared insecurity and empowerment that came out of that. A little bit later, I started doing more stuff in the founder startup community. So I spent a lot of time as a geek, a developer, and running community events, even like 20 years ago. I started when I was building my own company, trying to figure that out and spending time learning what entrepreneurship was, learning how to raise capital, learning how to do hiring and stuff. So I guess mid-late 90s, I spent a lot of time doing that stuff. And the people pictured here are obviously, geek icons, some of them more recent, some of them from quite some time back. And that process was also very arcane, at least in the 90s when I was trying to figure this shit out. I came to the Valley in around 89. It was not as easy as just looking up information on AngelList or Venture Hacks or on TechCrunch. You had to do a little bit more digging. And a lot of times it was very hard to understand, like, how the fuck do I raise capital? How do I get this thing called a startup off the ground? And that was a painful journey as well. But there was a lot of hero worship even then, and that certainly accelerated more in the last few years. We probably had 40 or 50 years of sort of geek hero worship in the Valley. How many people know of the term the traitorous eight? Yeah, very small. Fairchild Semiconductor? Shockley? Yeah. Okay, so those are, like, I'm sounding really geeky and old now. There was, I think I'm getting this right, there was a professor at Stanford named Shockley who started a company that was building transistors, probably around the 60s. And supposedly he was kind of a real asshole. There were very other talented people that were working with him, and they basically decided to leave and start a new company. There were 8 of them. One of those guys was Bill Noyce, I think Gordon Moore, the guys who started Intel, although originally they started Fairchild Semiconductor. So they left, and they were called the Traitorous Eight because they went to Bill Shockley and said, "Fuck you, we're leaving," and walked out and started a company. And a lot of the early tech companies in the Valley and a lot of the venture capital companies in the Valley came out of that group of people in the late 60s and even early 70s. National Semiconductor, Intel, Sequoia, I think maybe more David Howe, several other venture capital firms as well. So there's this whole mythos and culture around startups and entrepreneurship that's been in the Valley for pretty damn well 50 years or more. Several generations of that's happened. Disk drive manufacturers, PC manufacturers, the rise of Apple and Microsoft, later the internet sort of icons, so Yahoo and Amazon and eBay, then later Google and PayPal, part of that world I was part of. And there's a lot of money and fame worship in that world, some of which is kind of fucked up and doesn't really lead to happiness, some of which is misplaced. But whether it's good or bad, it is a part of what Silicon Valley is all about. So the whole chasing the entrepreneurial dream, I sort of call it the wantrepreneur syndrome sometimes. And whether that's fueling actual businesses that make money or whether it's fueling bubbles and bullshit, this is again part of the heritage of Silicon Valley. So I'll tie this together a little bit, but as I have spent the last 10, 20, now 25 years in the Valley trying to figure this shit out, one of the things for me that was really empowering was I'd spent some time as an engineer and I'd spent some time as a marketing person. Usually marketing people are incredibly distrusted by geeks. So the fact that I went from kind of the geeky programmer side to the marketing sales side is almost like I have committed a sin and gone to the dark side. I used to think about salespeople as evil fucks who lied in order to make money, and they were a tolerated necessity. Now I'm like, oh, those people are what make us run, and they're important. But sort of there's an inherent tension between the marketing and sales, folks and the product engineering design folks. There's also tensions between programming and design, and even between design and UX. So the tensions are fractal in a lot of ways. But I had been doing community for a long time, and I really enjoyed putting together conferences, a lot like this one, in fact. And I had wanted to travel. So one thing that I wanted to do was figure out a way to sort of get my travel around the world paid for without having to pay for it myself. And I came upon this idea for a name called Geeks on a Plane, and I was like so thrilled with that. I was like, when on GoDaddy's like, fuck, is that taken? No, it's not taken, awesome. And it was one of those like moments where the whole brand and theme just gets birthed out of this bullshit domain. And we started putting together a group of people to go to different places around the world. In 2009, we did the first trip to Tokyo, Beijing, and Shanghai, about 20 people or so. And then we did one to Europe, and then we did one to South America. And about 4 or 5 years later, we've done probably close to 13 or 14 of those trips. We've probably had over a couple hundred people visit over 30 or 40 countries. Occasionally, we get to meet with sort of somewhat important people. Again, there's this really strong feeling of community that happens when you travel with people for maybe an extended period, in this case, maybe just 10 to 12 days. And I think, what was interesting to me is those, I would call them branded communities. They were starting to be things that people could like sort of hang their hat on, hang a hashtag on, really associate with in very like niche little ways. And then in the venture capital world, we've started to have kind of these branded communities take over in a lot of ways as well. So like Y Combinator certainly, very visibly, Techstars also, but other even larger communities, so like Andreessen Horowitz and maybe First Round and a few others, starting to build brand reputations that aren't just the guys in glass and steel sitting on Sand Hill Road, but actually the members of those communities and in somewhat geeky ways. We started doing a lot of conferences, events around things that we thought were important. So, starting with a conference called Warm Gun that's around design and user experience, another one called Unsexy that's around monetization and B2B companies. We did one around family tech and parents called Mama Bear. And then more recently, one that we're doing in a couple of weeks that is happily called Commerceism. Salut, comrades. And we're going to do a Bitcoinference thing around that. And these are like super fun for me. I mean, we try and make a little bit of money, but we really do them more just because we want to have fun. We want to kind of learn about a subject. Maybe we're trying to market ourselves as knowledgeable in those areas. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why more VCs weren't doing like marketing and conferences, because they were really pretty easy once you kind of got the scale up. They actually made us money, and they helped us with all kinds of deal flow and visibility for our companies too. And I realized like most VCs just kind of suck at marketing. But for me, they were just like fun exercises. Like we would just like cook up these conferences and do them. We're gonna do one on growth hacking and distribution later this year that I think the title of the conference is going to be WMD, Weapons of Mass Distribution. Like that should be fun. So, and what I realized was like, starting to create these branded and niche communities was super fun, super engaging, and other people responded. Not everybody. Some people didn't feel like that was exciting, but when you go really narrow and deep on some of these topics, you maybe have a small community, but intense sort of feeling from that community because they feel like it's about them. You're like narrow casting to an audience of 10 people, and they're like, wow, that's special. It's just for me. And that's a really cool feeling. So kind of wrapping a lot of this stuff up, this was an intentional strategy when we were building 500 startups. Christine, my partner Christine, did a lot of developer evangelism at Google and YouTube, and we both enjoyed having fun. We both did a lot of stuff that wasn't geeky, music and dance and video. And we just started promoting our events in our communities in ways that we enjoyed. And somewhere along the way, I don't remember exactly when, and it might not have even been me, it might have been somebody else, we started like hashtagging either our demo day events or something else, this 500 strong thing. And people picked it up. I don't know why, we just got maybe lucky with that choice. But it became like a rallying cry. In fact, in a lot of ways, it felt like if you've ever seen the movie 300 and the guy kicks the guy in the chest and pushes him in the, fucking bell. We are Sparta! And he kicks the dude. Like, that is kind of the feeling. It's a little bit, male and geeky sometimes. Maybe that's not inclusive. But it was a very, very strong feeling. Whoa, all of a sudden got a lot more loud there. And we did a lot of the stuff that was using social media channels that, again, maybe companies used them, but for a lot of reasons, venture capital firms weren't using them. And so it was very easy for us to differentiate from the other people that we were usually compared to. So now if you kind of like take all this together and like, okay, let's take the kids and the fun and the education component, don't take ourselves too seriously. Hey, we're a community of geeks and developers that are oppressed and we share these things. And hey, we have these aspirational things about startups and founders, about how we're gonna change the world and make a bunch of money and maybe be famous. And then like these very aligned and niche communities around specific topics. All those things start to be extremely powerful. And I would say that the one thing I haven't talked about is, for me, all of these were also part of building family. And like when I started 500, one of the whole thesis was investing in a lot of companies, and the dirty little secret was I was an only kid, and my mom was like one of 6, and I always wanted to be part of this large family, and I always wanted a lot of people around me. So investment thesis became extremely selfish in satisfying my own personal needs, to travel, to have people around, to have folks that I enjoyed being with. And I think that rubbed off. And so a lot of other people who were maybe like, lonely souls who wanted community, we all kind of attracted and inherited each other. And that has, kind of become something I'm really proud of. It actually, was very organic. It was not a top-down strategy. I'm like looking at this shit now, I was like, oh yeah, there's my strategy. But everything sort of happened very like, oh, we tried something that didn't work, we tried something that kind of worked. And then after 3, 4, 5 years, it all started to fit together in a way that became extremely natural and extremely easy. And I don't know if this really makes sense or resonates with you. Again, this is kind of the first time I'm trying to put this whole talk together. But I feel super lucky. I mean, I get to do a job that's really, really fun. I get to meet people all over the world. Occasionally, I get to help them. I write a small check, or people on our team write a small check and help them, try and get off the ground. And most of those folks fail, but a few of them succeed. Anyway, that's kind of it.